Hey everyone,
Hey everybody.
welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Today we're going to be doing a little bit of a life update, housing update, baby update, kind of updating everything. But mostly we want to talk about our housing situation since we're not traveling as much anymore. A lot of you guys know we kind of settled down a little bit more in 2020, bought a house back home, and then now we just recently sold the house and are renting a house in our hometown now that we're going to be more settled down. So want to give an update about all that. Whitney's going to introduce us, and then we'll jump in.
Thanks for joining us. Our names are Whitney and Jared Kazaza. We're both physical therapists, and we started traveling over 10 years ago as new grad travel PTs. Many of you guys may have followed us for a while, or you could be newer to our page. For those of you that have followed us for a while, you know that we quite often over the years have given a lot of financial information in addition to our travel therapy content. So this will be more of a financial update, talk a little bit about the housing market and that kind of thing. Some of the decisions that we've made, which a lot of folks might find to be unconventional. But we feel like we've ended up in a really good place financially. Jared is really into finances. He's written tons and tons of articles over the years on our Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist blog, which was our original blog prior to having our travel therapy mentor business. So if you guys are interested in learning more about finances, he writes all about student loans and lots of different financial decisions that applies to everybody, physical therapists especially, but everybody. So you can check that out on our Fifth Wheel PT blog if you'd like. But yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about our life update, what we're doing with our housing situation, and a little bit about finances and the economy, I guess, in general.
Yeah, I guess going back a little bit, kind of starting from the beginning.
Real quick before we get into the recap. If you are watching live on Facebook or Instagram, we'd love if you'd just say hi in the comments, let us know you're watching, and then shout out to those of you that will watch later, either on our YouTube channel or listen on our podcast.
So when we first started traveling, people always ask us questions about tax homes, and we always tell people that we can give what we've learned, what we did, but we're not experts on this by any means. So anyway, for our housing situation, our tax home situation, when we started traveling, we rented rooms in a house from our parents. So Whitney rented a room for her mom. I rented a room for my mom. We did that for about 3 years. I guess it was actually about 4 years. And then around 2020.
And during that time, we were traveling in an RV and a fifth wheel, which is why we named our original blog Fifth Wheel PT. So we traveled in a camper for the majority of the first 3-4 years of our travel career. We did take a couple times where we had short-term housing. But for those of you that may not understand how the tax home stuff works, you can't, if you own an RV, that still can't be your tax home. You still have to have a permanent residence back in your area of your tax home. So for us, that's our hometown in Virginia, where we're from. We utilized our parents' houses because we were just coming out of college, so we didn't have our own lease or our own house. So a lot of people ask that, especially if they're new grads, like, do I have to have my own rental or my own home in order for that to be my tax home? You don't. It just made sense for us to just continue renting the bedroom in the house that we both lived in between our time, like at school. That's where we would come back to, and that was still each of our home. And we weren't married at that time, so each of us individually had our own tax homes for those first several years.
Yeah, and then around 2020, it became clear that we were going to be spending more time at home. It didn't really make sense for us to. Whitney was staying at her mom's house. I was staying at my mom's house. We were like, why are we doing this? Let's, spend some money, get a place together. We're probably going to be there more often now. And that's what we did. So in 2020, we found a townhouse that we bought, and we'd saved up enough money at that point that we paid cash for it. And that was kind of like, I guess, our starter home, and it made a lot of sense because it was low maintenance, and then we'd have low fixed costs because we wouldn't have a mortgage, and then we could use that as our place when we came back home, but we could still take travel assignments, do international travel, do whatever we wanted to do, road trips. And that was perfect for us.
Yeah.
We planned to live there for 2 or 3 years. We ended up staying there for 5 years. And we really couldn't have asked for a much better starter house or like a home base for that period of time in life when we were in and out quite a bit.
Yeah, so the reason we ended up just getting our own place is because when COVID hit in 2020, we were still planning on doing the same thing with our tax home for a few more years while we were full-time traveling as travel therapists and traveling internationally quite a bit for fun. But when COVID happened, we were going to be home for the foreseeable future. We knew for probably several months. And so we looked at maybe renting an apartment, but we found a really good deal on a townhouse, and we were able to buy it in cash, actually. as Jared mentioned. And that caused some controversy back then when we bought it in cash. People were like, the mortgage rates are really low right now. Why didn't you take advantage of a mortgage? Why would you put your cash into this in terms of an investment? So I'll let Jared dig into that a little bit more, but that was kind of the main reason why we were like, we need our own place. And then after COVID kind of calmed down and we did resume traveling more for work and for fun, it was a really easy, low maintenance place that we would just kind of like use as like a landing pad between travels. So it was really good for us for several years, like Jared said, as a starter home.
Yeah, and in terms of the decision to pay cash instead of get a mortgage, I've written a couple articles on that. Just briefly, um, it, some of the reasons why it made sense for us is one, the closing costs were a lot less. We were able to close in less than a week, so we found this townhouse. It was in the heart of COVID, like April of 2020. We wanted to move in there as quickly as we could, so we closed. I think it was like 4 days after we saw it, we owned it. So you obviously can't do that with the mortgage. The closing costs were only, it was a little bit less than 1% of the purchase price, whereas if you get a mortgage, probably 2, 3, sometimes even a little bit more than 3%. Also, like I said, we knew we weren't going to stay there long term. It was only going to be supposed to only be 2 or 3 years. We stayed for 5. And the article I wrote a couple years ago about mortgage amortization, a lot of people don't understand that, like, if you're only going to stay at a place short term, because of that amortization schedule, you end up paying a ton of interest, even though you might have an interest rate back then of 4%. You really end up paying over 3 years or so. You pay, probably 70, 80% of your payment goes towards interest because they front load the interest on these mortgage loans, knowing that most people move. And then, so basically, if you don't have significant appreciation, you end up losing money on it. And then that's something that really people need to consider when you think about whether you want to buy a place or rent a place, how long you're going to be there, all of that.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I didn't know much about the mortgage amortization schedule until Jared started explaining all that to me. And he was really talking about how and this is going to play into our next part of our discussion when we talk about what we're doing now. But for those of you that aren't familiar with it either, actually, if you're going to stay at a house for less than, what did you figure, like maybe 10 years?
Yeah, definitely if it's less than 5 years, it's hard for me. It's in the current environment to recommend buying a house over renting a house, but even less than 10 years, you really need to start thinking about how long you're going to be in a place. Because when you go through all the closing costs and the amortization and all that, you really, unless you have significant appreciation, you end up losing money when you buy.
Yeah, so if you are thinking about buying a house, that is something to consider. A lot of people say like, oh, well, this is going to be our starter home. We're just going to be here for 5 years. But quite often in that situation, it really doesn't even make sense financially for you to buy something if you're going to be there for less than 5 years. So definitely check out that article about home buying and the mortgage amortization schedule on our Fifth Wheel PT blog if you are interested in learning a little more about that. But yeah, so we ended up staying at that townhouse for 5 years. And
well, I think real quick, I think the article, if you want to find it, I think it's called like the hidden cost of mortgage amortization or the misunderstood mortgage amortization or something like that. But if you search amortization on the Fifth Wheel PT website, you can find it.
Yeah, or we can also link to it in the comments after this video. But yeah, so just, as far as life went, we continued to travel on and off until around the 10-year mark. And so around 2023, we'd been living at the townhouse for 3 years, and we got married then. And we sort of started keeping an eye out for a different house that we would want to buy to live in more long term. We knew that that townhouse wasn't going to be our forever home. It wasn't big enough. It wasn't in the part of town that we wanted to live in long term. And then I guess a little thing to throw in here too was like, we were always kind of considering, where do we want to settle down when we finally, stop traveling or start traveling less. And we went back and forth for a long time, but we knew that when we wanted to start a family, that we were going to want to be close to our parents and our families. And gosh, has that been such a good decision. It's been just vital for us to have both of our moms nearby to help with children. I don't know how people raise kids not near their family or that don't have good family ties. Hopefully you have good friends or other relationships with folks that can help you. But yeah, it's been such a good decision for us to decide to settle down back in our hometown. We considered so many other places. We were actually just talking to some friends that lived in Asheville, North Carolina for a short time, and they're recently moving back into our hometown too, because they're like, we love Asheville, but we have 2 kids now, and it's so hard to be away from like your village of people. And we're like, yeah, we've been to all 50 states. We've been to other countries. There's so many places we've thought about living before that are amazing. And when people found out that we were settling down back at home, they're like, wow, Roanoke, Virginia must just be the most amazing place ever if you guys, the world travelers, decided to settle down there. And it's really not. It's not the most amazing place ever. It's good. It's got a lot of the things that we like. But there are certainly other places that maybe were better. But the draw to be near family when you have children is just huge for us. So,
And not just that, but the other thing we really considered, like Whitney said, there's a lot of places we kind of fell in love with when we were traveling. For a while, some of you guys might remember, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we were talking about how we were going to move to Portugal and we were going to live there, and that was going to be so great. But really, when you think a lot about it, you take into account cost of living, weather, natural disasters, mountains. We want mountains and lakes. There's not that many places in the country that would fit that for us. And then outside the country, it's just a lot of logistics. It's much harder than we thought back then. Like we were fairly naive when we first started traveling internationally. We'd only been to maybe 12 or 15 countries, and we didn't really understand like what all would be involved in getting a visa, trying to become citizens, residents of the country. Like there's a lot involved in that. And then of course having kids and how, well, are they going to go to school there or you go to homeschool? There's just a lot. And then of course being 5-6 hour plane ride from your family is also kind of difficult.
yeah. So, all that to say that we ultimately decided that the place that we wanted to settle down long term and have our home base is back in our hometown of Roanoke, Virginia. But we knew the townhouse wasn't it. Like it wasn't going to be a forever home for us. So back in 23, probably, I mean, Jared looks at Zillow all the time. He's been looking at the Zillow every day for years. But I'd say seriously, about 2 years ago, when we got married, we kind of started looking at some houses, actually going and looking at them with realtors, going to open houses, thinking about buying a house. And we ended up not finding anything. And everything has been really overpriced. As you guys know, just inflation is crazy. Housing prices are up so much. Mortgage rates are up so much. So there's been a lot of barriers that have kept us from buying a house up until this point. But we've still kind of been looking. Then in 2024, I got pregnant and we were planning on having a baby. And I was really hoping that we would be in a new house, like be in our forever home when we had the baby. But as my due date got closer, we just weren't finding the right thing. And we just decided, it'll be fine to stay in the townhouse. We have plenty of space to have a baby. We don't need a ton of extra space to have a baby. Gosh, back in the day, we used to think about having a baby in the fifth wheel, which we know people that do that, travel in an RV with a baby. So we were like, this will be fine. So we were like, okay, we'll stay here for a while longer. It'll be good. But all along, just kind of still looking at houses. And I'd say our search got more serious this spring. We started going and looking at more. We actually made offers on a couple of houses. And we got beat out on the 2 offers that we did make. They were still bidding over the asking price. And I will say both the houses that we made offers on, we're actually kind of glad we didn't get, because I feel like we were getting a little bit like jumpy toward wanting to buy something and wanting to move to the area of town that we want to be in long term. And I think that we were a little bit settling on some of those houses that we were making offers on. So looking back now, I'm glad that we didn't get those houses.
Yeah, like Whitney said, when we started looking in 23, it was kind of still a little bit cursory, I would say, because we knew that we were going to go on a long honeymoon trip. We went out of the country for 3 months. We did a trip to South America and Antarctica at the beginning of 24 for, I think it was like 2 months or almost 3 months. And then we did another travel contract for 3 months. So basically, like, the idea of buying like a nice house that we wanted to be in forever and then having to pay for it while we were gone and then also potentially having any issues while we were gone is not really something we wanted to do. Whereas like the townhouse, we didn't have a mortgage on it. Our monthly expenses on that townhouse were maybe $300 each, everything included: utilities, property taxes, homeowners insurance. So, when we're gone, it's not a big deal because we're paying almost nothing back home. But if we had a $4,000 a month mortgage payment, we'd feel a little different about traveling for 3 months and still having to make that payment. So even though we were kind of looking, I definitely was not really ready to buy something. Whereas 6 months ago, 9 months ago, we have the baby now. We knew we're probably not going to take any long trips. Now it's more the time where we kind of wanted to get something.
Yeah, so, our housing search got more serious, and we were really, looking. There's this particular area of town that we like a lot better, that we want to be at long term, and so we kept looking. It's a big decision to make, to think of a house to buy that's going to be your forever home, because you need to think about what your family is like now and what your family is going to be like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And we really did want it to be a forever home. Something else that we've also considered is we're kind of at this stage of life where you're raising young children, but you also have aging parents. So we've always thought it would be nice to have the option to have a home that has the potential for an in-law suite. And that really has made it a challenge to find a perfect house that we want to make our forever home to buy right now, because we need to think of a layout that's going to work well with having babies, or one baby or multiple babies. We're hoping to have more kids, and also a house that would work well for an in-law suite situation. In addition to that, gosh, there's just so many factors to think about with a house. We value privacy and having a little more space, maybe some land. But then as soon as you start looking at houses with land, it's like, well, how far are you away from all your amenities? Now, are you out in the country? Because it quickly becomes countryside out here where we live in Southwest Virginia. It's like city, and then in 20 minutes you're headed out toward the country. And we have family and friends that live 30 minutes from a grocery store. So there's a lot of decisions there of like, do you want to be in town or do you want to be more on the outskirts? Do you want to have something that has walkable areas to take a walk around your neighborhood, or are you going to be on a long road back to your private house? So there were just so many factors when we were looking at houses. We just kept having trouble finding what would be the perfect home.
Yeah, and then of course there's still a lot of question marks. Like, we plan on having at least one more kid, but you never know. So do we need 4 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms? We don't know. What if we have 3 kids? What if we can only have 1 kid? You don't know yet. So still a lot of question marks, which kind of makes it difficult to plan for 20 or 30 years if we want to stay in the same house.
Yeah. So I think the smart thing to do would have been to just stay in the townhouse a little longer. We talked about just staying in the townhouse a little longer, but we were getting a little antsy, just kind of wanting to almost like start our new life in this new part of town that we want to be in. Because at the townhouse, it still felt like what it had felt like all along of us, like going and coming back, like on trips. And I felt like we were having trouble getting into like a new routine of like, this is our home. And so in a lot of ways, we were just like, we're just so ready to be in a new house and just be there. So with that said, we were definitely planning on either buying or staying at the townhouse. But spoiler alert, we're actually now renting a house. And when Jared brought up the idea of considering renting a house for a short time, I was so against it. I was like, I have no desire. We have a baby. I don't want to move. Moving is a huge hassle, coming from the people that move all the time for work, but moving your whole life, like all the stuff that you own, which you're going to own a lot more stuff once you have kids, is a lot harder than just packing for a travel assignment or packing for an international trip. So I didn't want to move. But this house that we're currently renting popped up, and it was just an offer too good to pass up. And finally, I came around to the idea.
Yeah, I was becoming more interested in the idea of renting for probably about 6 months, but Whitney was very against it. And so I'd kind of been watching what rentals were available, but nothing really seemed good in terms of like what we could rent it for versus like what we would want to buy, and finding something similar. But then this place popped up. It's in the exact neighborhood we want to be in. It's like a pretty good layout for us. It's pretty close to what we'd want. And crazy thing about the housing market right now is that if this house, say they were to sell it for what it's worth, the mortgage payment on it would be almost 50% more than what we're renting it for. So the housing market is so out of whack right now, especially on some of the more expensive houses. It's often that you can rent for significantly less than you can buy. And that depends on what area of the country you're in. Some places are different. But for a lot of the country, it makes a lot of sense, I think, right now to rent. And I think that's going to change over time. But for the next probably year, 2, 3 years, you should definitely have that as a consideration. Maybe it does make more sense if you're thinking about buying right now to rent instead and wait. Because if you can rent for less, then not only our mortgage would have been 50% more, but then we have to worry about every little thing that can go wrong. What if something happens with the roof? What if something happens with the AC unit, the furnace, all these things that now we're just renting, so we can, all that's for free, they'll repair it. So a lot less burden on us in terms of potential unexpected costs as well.
Yeah, long term, I don't want to be a renter, because so we actually just sold. That's a whole other thing we're going to talk about, is that we sold our townhouse. It closed last week, or no, earlier this week on Friday it closed. So when that happened, we're like, it's bittersweet, We're saying goodbye to our first home together, our home where we brought our baby home. There's a lot of great memories there, but it's so exciting. Now we're moving on to the next chapter. But at that moment, it became very real of we don't own that house anymore. So we are renting here until our lease is up, which right now we have a 1 year lease, but we have the potential to extend. But at any given time, the owners of the house could say, we need you to vacate, we need you to leave. Either your lease ends or they say that they want their house back. We're living in a home that the owners actually were living here before. They've moved, but they might come back. So for me, thinking long term, that feels very uncertain. And I don't like that uncertainty of not knowing if someone is going to come knock on the door and say, like, you have to leave. I would prefer to own the house long term and know that no one is going to tell me to leave. But, you know, temporarily for a couple of years, we think that it's a really good fit for us. And it was very interesting to me to find out the difference in the price, like Jared mentioned. We can look at the price history of this house and see that they bought it for a lot less back when they bought it. And we're just making some assumptions that maybe they have a really good mortgage rate. And maybe it makes sense for them. It has to make sense for them, right? Financially, to rent it to us at the price that they're renting it to us. However, if we were to buy this house from them and then have the mortgage ourselves, as well as the HOA and all the taxes, it's crazy the difference of how much it would cost right now. The housing market is super out of whack. And so if any of you have been looking at renting versus buying, I'd be curious to know if that is the same in your area. But yeah, financially, it just made a lot of sense. Not only financially, but it also bought us some time. So it bought us some time to wait it out for a couple of years. We're hoping more than 1 year. We're hoping we could stay in this house for 2 to 3 years. See what happens with growing our family. See what happens with our aging parents, if that is still a consideration that we need to be thinking about or not. It gives us some more time to keep an eye out for what we might consider the perfect house or the perfect layout. And then also, you know, everyone's kind of waiting like to see if housing prices are going to come down. So it gives us more time to see if housing prices are going to come down for something that we would actually purchase and buy.
Yeah, and kind of like Whitney said, I think the people that are renting this house to us, it's a kind of, I guess, a unique situation. A lot of rental houses have always been rental houses, but this place came up, and I was looking at like what they purchased it for. You can see all that stuff now online, and looked at the mortgage rates around then, and I think probably they're basically just breaking even renting it to us. And they're using this as like a placeholder, like, okay, we'll still have this house if we want to come back in a year or 2 years if these new jobs don't work out. They moved across the country to take new jobs, and so if they want to come back, they can. And so for them, they're like, okay, great, the mortgage is covered while we're traveling, we're away. If we want to come back, we can. For us, it's like, okay, what they paid for this house probably is about 60% less than what it's worth now, and their mortgage rate was less than half of the current mortgage rate. So them renting it to us for around what their mortgage payment is means that we get to rent this house for way less than we were able to buy the house for. And so those are some of the kind of considerations now that you have to think about if you're going to rent a place, because there are situations where that you can rent for way less than what the mortgage payment would be, but the owners are still in a pretty good situation renting it for that because their mortgage payment is so low from when they bought. So because the housing market has gone so crazy, prices have in some areas have doubled in 5 years, and then mortgage rates have also doubled. It's a really unique time in terms of rent versus buy.
Yeah, and I think that's counterintuitive for a lot of people because so many people say, you always hear this, even if you know nothing about finances and you know nothing about houses, what do you always hear people say? You're throwing away money if you're renting. You have to buy in order for it to be an investment. That's what they always say, right? And I don't know much about the housing market. I don't know much about the financial side of that kind of thing, but you just always hear that, right? You're probably sitting there on the other side of the screen listening to us talk and you're like, yeah, you're throwing away money renting. Why are you doing that? That's just like the conventional wisdom. But being that Jared is very into finances and very into learning about all this stuff, he knows way more about it than I do and possibly more than you do. And the math works out, you know? So what would you say about that, about throwing away money if you're renting?
Well, like I said, a lot of that depends on how long you plan to stay in the house. So let's say you bought a house and you do plan to stay there 30 years and you get a mortgage on the house and you pay down the mortgage completely. Well, all you're paying in interest is what your actual interest rate is. So say that's right now 6%, so you get a 6% mortgage. In a lot of situations that can make a lot of sense. But like I said earlier, because of the transaction costs, the closing, the realtor fees, all that stuff, a lot of times when you buy and sell a house, it ends up being about 10% between realtor fees, closing costs on the buy side and on the sell side. So 10% of a house price ends up going in fees. And then you have repairs. Almost everyone ends up doing some sort of like renovations, repairs, that kind of stuff throughout the course of owning it. So, you know, say you buy a house plan to stay there for 5 years. It's kind of a starter house. You plan to have 1 or 2 kids, and then you know you're going to have to move. Well, in a lot of situations, that 10% combined with any repairs and things that you have to do along the way, um, and then combined with the fact that a lot of the interest is front loaded in the mortgage, you don't come out ahead like you think you would. And so yeah, it depends on the situation. If you do plan to stay there long term, there are definitely situations where it makes more sense. You're actually building equity, but a lot of the equity you build is not so much later in the life of the loan. So just think about how long you plan to stay there, because I would say if it's less than 10 years and the interest rates where they are now, probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you do plan to stay there 20 or 30 years, okay, then it might make sense. Maybe you really are kind of throwing money away. But yeah, there was a time back when I first got into real estate. I was looking into real estate investing back when I was 18. I took real estate classes. I was looking at rental properties. That's when I first started looking at it. So that was a half a lifetime ago for me. And back then, yeah, I thought like, oh, renting, that's so crazy. No one should ever rent. You're giving money away. You can just be paying down your principal. But when you actually look into it, it's not like you think it would be. And especially in the situation right now, the housing market is at levels it's almost never been at before in terms of affordability. It's at more unaffordable levels than it was before the housing crash in 2008. So you have to take that into consideration, because basically if you're buying and you're planning to stay there for 5 years, you're just hoping that the house appreciates enough that it offsets all those fees and things you have to pay. But I would say there's a pretty good likelihood that the next 5 years, you're not going to see a lot of appreciation, and you might even see reductions in housing prices. And depending on where you're at in the country, you've already seen that, because places that really boomed during COVID, they peaked kind of like early 23, even late 22, and they've declined since then. And I think this coming year, more than half of the states are expecting declines in housing prices. So forecasting forward, if you're buying right now, you really need to be sure you're going to stay there long term, because if you have 10% transaction costs and your house stays the same or loses value and you move in 5 years, that's kind of a worst case scenario. You're spending way more than it would have been if you just rented for 5 years. So it's a very individual situation. You need to think about your own housing market. You need to think about how long you're going to stay there. You need to think about what interest rate you can get. A lot of factors to consider.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You talk to realtors and you talk to folks, and like we've been looking at houses again for like 2 years now, and a lot of the realtors are saying, yeah, they say rates are going to come down. They say the market's going to come down. Nobody really knows for sure.
Well, so
well, don't get into the whole rate.
Well, anyway, a little bit about that. Like, so we've talked to a lot of realtors and a lot of people over the years, and people have a very weird understanding of interest rates, because people hear things like, oh, the Fed's going to cut rates, and they directly associate that Fed rate cut to a reduction in 30-year loan rates. But that's not the case, because the mortgage rate is tied to the 10-year bond rate. And often, if the Fed is cutting rates into a inflationary environment, the 10-year bond rate will increase, which makes mortgage rates go up. So counterintuitively, the Fed reducing rates on the short end can make the long end more expensive and make mortgage rates increase. So a lot of people just have a very superficial level understanding of the financial system, and they think Fed rate cuts equals lower mortgage rates. But in a situation where you have high inflation, that's not the case. Often Fed rate cuts actually equal higher 30-year mortgage rates.
So what do you think is actually going to happen with rates? Is there any way to know, or?
I would say that rates are probably going to decline over the next 5 years. They'll probably moderate some. So the 10-year yield will probably decrease, and that's tied to the 30-year mortgage rate. But I don't think it's going to be a significant decline. I would say like probably mortgage rates right now, I think the average is maybe 6.5. Unless we go into a severe recession, I don't think that they're going to go a lot lower than like 5.5, maybe 5%. And that's not a big enough decline to really stimulate the housing market. So I think probably the majority of the country is going to see reductions in housing prices. And that also definitely played into our decision to rent instead of buy right now.
Well, that was about rates, but then I was also going to ask about prices. Like, what factors are you looking at to think that the prices? I know you told me before that some areas of the country that you're watching, the prices are already coming down, like Austin and some other areas. What are some other things that tell you that the prices of the houses are probably going to come down?
You have to look at inventory levels and the number of sales, and also median income compared to house price, because when you look at that kind of stuff right now on a national basis, when I was talking about home unaffordability, or home affordability, it's the worst it's been. And the reason for that is if you look at the median income compared to the median house price, that's something I watch pretty often, it's really bad right now. I mean, the median income you need like, I can't remember what the median income is. It's maybe like 70,000. The median house price is maybe 420, 430 right now. That's the worst it's ever been. It used to be, the median income was 50 and the house price was 200,000. So you only needed 4 years of the median income to pay for the median house. But now that's not the case. So when you look at those kind of things and you look at like what income somebody would need in order to afford a house on the average house, it just doesn't line up right now. So it's a situation where housing prices can't increase much more than this because no one can afford to buy them. And there's a lot of people, if you talk to real estate professionals, that will say, okay, well, the reason that prices are going to keep going up is because there's a mismatch into supply and demand. So they're basically saying that there's not enough supply. There's a lot of millennials and Gen Z that need to buy houses right now that are starting families like us. But the issue with that is they're not looking at how many baby boomers and how many of the silent generation are now going to need to sell their houses in the next 5 years. A lot of these people are downsizing, or they're moving to assisted living or to nursing homes, or they're passing away. And that is a huge generation. The baby boomer generation was, for the millennials, the biggest generation. So yeah, I think there's sometimes people overlook things because it makes sense for them to overlook things. And I think that's the situation for a lot of people in the real estate market, is they're like, oh, there's been a supply, there's more demand than supply. That's why prices have gone up. And it's going to be that way going forward. And I think they're really overlooking how many people are going to be selling houses or moving in the next 3 or 4 years. And the thing too about rates coming down, people say rates coming down means housing prices are going to go up. Traditionally, that's been the case, but I think that's not so much going to be the case now, because there's a lot of people for 5 years now, us included, that were looking at upsizing, like getting a bigger house, but they didn't sell because they would get a higher interest rate. So someone that had a 3% mortgage or a 4% mortgage locked in, they don't want to sell and get a bigger house or move to a different neighborhood, because now their mortgage is going to be 7 or 8%. But say that the mortgage rates come down to 5 and you're locked in at 4%. Well, now it's not such a big delta, and you might want to consider actually moving. So just because rates come down, there might be more buyers unlocked, but there also going to be more sellers unlocked. So you have to look at both sides of that supply and demand equation.
Okay. Yeah. So Jared tells me about this stuff all the time. I call them lectures, because to me, I'm like, this is like an economy lecture that we all just sat through. But he honestly has his headphones on all the time, watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, learning about a lot of this stuff. And so, a lot of what he has learned and what projections he's looking at played into our decision to rent right now, in hopes, but not just like hopes and dreams, but like informed decision-making hopes that in the next couple of years, while we're renting, that the housing prices are going to come down and we will be in a better situation to buy a house at that time. And so, I kind of wanted to share some of that, not just as a life update for those of you that might care about our life, but I know that there's so many of you out there that are also in the next 5 years looking to buy a house or looking to settle down, and are wondering, what am I going to do? You're looking at your own financial situation. Also, the elephant in the room is student loans. A lot of you are having student loan payments come back. And so you're looking at your finances and you're like, everything is so unaffordable right now. How am I going to afford to buy a home? So hopefully some of the stuff that Jared has talked about will come to fruition, that more, I'm sorry, excuse me, that more inventory will come on the market with the baby boomers vacating houses, that if the rates do come down, that more people will be willing to sell. So more inventory will come on the market, and hopefully that will drive some of the prices down and make houses more affordable for all of us. Because it definitely is very grim economic times right now for folks that don't have a lot of wealth built yet. Folks that are millennials and Gen Z that don't have a lot of money saved yet. It's a grim outlook for how am I going to ever afford to buy a house, right? But I think the positive thing for you to think about if you're feeling that way is that for a lot of people financially, it really does just make more sense to rent right now. And we're doing better financially than we ever have been, thanks to travel therapy, getting in such a good financial position, as well as, being savvy financially with our investments over the last 10 years. We're in a great financial position. We can absolutely afford to buy a house. There's plenty of houses that we could buy right now. We just weren't ready to make that leap yet on something that we didn't feel like was the perfect forever home for us. So for right now, we're super happy with our decision to rent. Again, there's that little bit in the back of my mind of like the uncertainty, not liking that, if our lease really truly ends in a year, which it's not a year because we've been here for a month and a half, it's like 10 and a half months from now, we might have to move again, which is annoying. But overall, we're super happy with our decision. And hopefully you guys will also, find yourself in the next few years in a better financial position to be able to pursue buying a home if that's what you'd like to do.
Yeah.
But if not, again, don't stress too much about renting right now. It's not a bad decision.
And you really need to pay attention to your own market because the housing market is extremely bifurcated right now. There are areas, the two biggest ones that stick out are like Miami and Austin, where prices have declined 15 to 20% in the last 2 or 3 years. There's also areas in New England or the Midwest where prices are up 5 to 10% in the last 3 years. So it's definitely not a one size fits all market. It never is, but I feel like right now it's even more of a disparity than usual. So it depends on your market. And for example, our market in Roanoke, Virginia, prices have been fairly stagnant in terms of like selling prices for probably 2 years now, kind of since we really started looking. So if we bought something 2 years ago, it's not like we missed out on a lot of appreciation. So I don't think that you need to be kind of in tune with your own market, but I don't think that like our market is going to see a lot of appreciation. Like if I'm wrong, I think I'm going to be wrong by maybe at worst 5% in 3 years, not like 20% or 30% like we saw the last 3 to 4 years. So I think sometimes people get FOMO about prices increasing and stuff, and that obviously applies to financial assets, things like cryptocurrency or equities, but it also applies to the housing market. You see the market go up 50% in 3 years in your area, and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to buy now. But that is always in history the worst time to buy. So can prices continue to go higher? Can they stagnate? Yes, but the odds become way, way lower that that's going to happen after a big run up in prices. And that's what happened in 2007, 2008 is that people started getting FOMO. They started buying a bunch of rental properties. And then you saw what happened after that. On a national basis, I think house prices declined like 30%. And in some markets, they declined 50%. So not saying that's going to happen, but we're in a situation with the affordability and everything where that could happen. So I would not be in a major rush to buy. And that's kind of that article I wrote in 2023. That's kind of what I was talking about then too. And I would say so far, 2 years later, that has been accurate. Like at least in our market, it would have not benefited us at all to buy 2 years ago. We'd be in the same position.
Yeah. So that's a bit on the financial decision about why we've decided to rent a home right now. I did want to spend a minute talking a little bit about why we decided to sell our townhouse, because we actually benefited a lot on the investment, although Jared will point out that he would have benefited more putting that money into the stock market or other investments. But I'm like, well, you can't live in the stock market, so we did need a place to live.
Yeah.
But came out ahead financially from buying it in 2020 in cash and selling it now. And because it's a townhouse, there's a lot of folks that rent those townhouses, and it's usually a very good rental property for someone that wants to use that as an investment. So the math will work out really well for us to rent it and make good profit on that as a rental. And for a long time, we actually did think that we were going to rent. And as Jared mentioned, he started looking back into real estate when he was 18. He thought that he was going to become a realtor, do all this house hacking, and also be a landlord and buy houses and rent them out. So over the years, we've gone back and forth about that so much, about whether once we were done with our townhouse, would we rent it out? And ultimately, we decided not to. Ultimately, we decided to sell it, take the profits, and move on. And a lot of that was just not wanting to deal with the hassle of being landlords.
Part of it was that. Part of it also, after all the transaction costs, all the realtor fees, everything, we made about 80% on it in 5 years. And it wasn't a huge purchase price to start with, so it's not like the most amount of money ever. But I do think that the prices on those types of townhouses that we were living in is probably either going to stay stagnant or decline in the coming years. So thinking about renting it, having the hassle, what we could rent it for is not even like a significant amount in terms of our total income right now. So, and like Whitney knows more, like way too much, is that little things like that will bother me a lot. So if we had issues with this rental, I would think about that way more than the income is worth. And so, yeah, I think for us in our current situation, maybe if we made a lot less money or we weren't as in good financial shape, we didn't have a lot of prospects to do with that money, then maybe it made sense to rent it. But for our current situation. It was just like the hassle, the amount that we would make, potentially a decline in the price that I think is probably going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. It just didn't make sense.
Yeah, we just kind of wanted to get out while we could. We have a lot of other investments that are doing well, and we have a profitable business, and it just really wasn't an investment that we needed. And we kind of are looking to simplify our lives. Like, I'm going to get into talking about long-term planning just for a couple minutes about like what our life is going to look like in the future. But right now we have a baby, we're busy, life is a little bit hectic. We just want to live a simple life and not have to deal with being someone's landlord. We have family members that are landlords and have friends that have been landlords. And we've heard a lot of horror stories about managing tenants and the way that they can damage your property and a lot of the hassle that goes into it. Now, of course, yes, there are property managers and ways that you can mitigate those things, but a lot of folks that we know that have rentals as an investment, when their tenants move out, they have to do so many repairs to fix what was damaged, replace the carpet, all the paint, if not more. And that just really wasn't something we wanted to deal with. We just kind of wanted to just be done with it. So that's what we decided to do, even though a lot of people were like, "You're crazy for doing that." But we're happy with our decision. It is bittersweet to have left our townhouse behind, but we're super happy to be in our new house. As far as lifestyle wise, like I said, we moved to the part of town that we want to live in long term. We're actually kind of excited about the prospect of a little bit like trying it before you buy it in this particular neighborhood that we're in. As I had mentioned before, some of our criteria were that we wanted to have more space and privacy, but with the pro and con of that is like then sometimes you give up having a neighborhood that's very walkable. This is one of the few neighborhoods where you actually have quite a bit of space and privacy with really good mountain views, but there is still a neighborhood you can walk in. So we've really been enjoying that, like evening walks as a family, being able to get out. Jared's been doing some morning rucking with his rucksack and weight plate. We've just got the most amazing mountain views, and we're like, oh my gosh, like this actually, we so far have only been here like 6 weeks, but we're really interested to see how we're going to like it over this next year or so and see if we would actually want to buy in this exact neighborhood. One of the cons of this neighborhood is that we do have a little bit of a mountainous road to get here from town, and I'm not familiar with driving on those roads. It does make me a little nervous, so I'm interested to see over the next year how I'm going to like driving on that road daily to get into town. So these are just some things that I think it's really good for us to kind of try it out before we commit to buying a house that's going to be for our forever home, to decide would we rather be a little bit more in town or a different type of neighborhood. So that's pretty cool. Also trying out this layout. So the layout of this house, it's quite a bit bigger than our townhouse, which has been so nice to have more space. We've got a really nice backyard. So it's actually, everything is pretty much on the main level. And then we have an upstairs that has a couple of extra rooms, but there's no basement. And I've been thinking long term that I want to have a basement, but I'm not sure. So it'll be interesting to live here for a year or so and see, is that really a deal breaker, having a basement versus not having a basement. So yeah, there's just some interesting things about this house that like we're loving it right now, but we want to kind of see long term, is this the type of house, is this the type of neighborhood that we want to live in?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, I mean, if you're thinking about buying just a house you're going to live in for 4 or 5 years, like I said, one, be careful about making that decision because it might not really make sense financially. But two, you're kind of locked in there, and that's how we felt with the townhouse. Like that was good for us then, but obviously we kind of grew out of it over the next subsequent 4 or 5 years, and that's what I would worry about if we would have just like jumped on a house. If we would have gotten our offer accepted on the two that we made offers on, what if we got there and we didn't like it? So it's kind of nice to be able to rent. It could even be the house that we end up buying. Like this could be a house that they end up wanting to sell to us. So being able to rent it and see if we like it before we make the decision that we're going to stay here for 20 years, I think that's pretty valuable because, yeah, you just never know.
Yeah. And thinking long term, like this is the part of town, like the school district that we want to be in for our children. So that's pretty cool just to kind of get more familiar with this area. And then little stuff like we think the gym we're going to now is probably going to be our long-term gym, and like our grocery store and that sort of thing. And then also, we're not completely ruling out that we'll ever do travel therapy contracts again. We get questions about that a lot. Right now, we are really loving the stability of being home. We've taken some trips with our baby just for fun and for work conferences, but not any like big trips, and we haven't taken any travel contracts. But it is really hard to travel. It's so much different traveling solo as a couple versus with a child. And so we don't know for sure whether we want to take her or subsequent children on travel contracts. We're not ruling it out. We just went and visited this past or earlier this week. We went to Charlottesville, Virginia for 2 days, and that was where we had our last travel contract. And that's a beautiful area that we really enjoyed. We've also really been thinking a lot about going back to Alaska at some point. So we're not saying for sure that we will or won't take more travel contracts, but right now we're enjoying life the way it is right now. So we'll kind of see what life brings. But later down the line, we've thought about all kinds of business ideas that we might do in the future when we're kind of, out of the travel therapy game more. Will we continue our online business, or will we want something that's more local? We've thought about opening our own gym/clinic at some point in life. So it's kind of interesting to be in this part of town and get familiar with it. And I've thought so many times, I don't know if you've been thinking this too, but like when we drive back and forth to town, I'm like, I wonder if there's a place that we could open a gym like over here in this complex or over here, or that land is for sale. Would we build a building? So those are some things that we thought about too. So overall, we're just really enjoying where we are with life right now, and we'll see what the future brings.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, there was a time not that long ago when we were living in the camper, and I would say things like, "Oh, we never need more than 300 square feet." I mean, the camper was like 150 square feet or less, and I was thinking like, "Oh, we'll always live in a small place and all this." And then life situations change, and you start to appreciate things more. And yeah, so now like I can't even imagine going back to living in a small place again. So just because you feel one way at some point doesn't mean you're not gonna grow out of that, or you're gonna change your opinion later on. And of course, part of that for us is like we're in a better financial position than we would have ever thought we'd be in. I would have never thought that we'd be in the financial position we are now if you went back 10 years. So you can't even predict those things sometimes. So yeah, you just have to kind of evolve as you go. So that's also another reason why you got to be careful about like where you buy, what you buy, all that stuff, because you might think you're going to live there 30 years, and then 3 years in, you might be like, wow, I really don't like it here. And then now you have to really think about the transaction costs and all the costs that come along with buying and selling a house.
Talking about switching from living in a camper to like where we're living now, and the houses that we're looking now that are a lot more square foot than we thought we would have ever looked at. There's pros and cons to that. Like I enjoy spreading out a little bit more now and being able to have more stuff and more space. But the more stuff you have, like when you go to move, it's a hassle. So yeah, there's pros and cons to that minimalist life that we were living.
Yeah.
It definitely was a big hassle to move. We've acquired a lot of stuff. And I know that if we buy a big house, we're going to fill a big house.
Whitney's going to fill it.
You like to buy things too, and you're looking forward to having now. So we've never had a garage before together. Jared grew up in a house that had a garage. I never have had a garage before in my life, but we have a 2-car garage here that we can pull the cars in. And it's so nice for so many reasons.
And another 1-car garage that's like a shed. So yeah, we have more space than we ever thought we'd have.
Yeah. So, and I'm really looking forward to it when winter rolls around, as far as temperature control and that sort of thing, right? So we've been here 6 weeks already. Jared's like, this garage isn't big enough. I need a 3-car garage, because he wants to put a home gym whenever we buy a future house. So I'm like, okay, I'm not the only one spreading my wings from our minimalist RV days. Jared has to have a 3-car garage now.
Not have to.
Yeah, it has to. Yeah. So we'll see. But yeah, so that's just a little update on where we're at in life and with the housing stuff and all of that. So hopefully this was insightful for anybody who's thinking about buying a house in the future. Hopefully the economy will improve over the next few years. Gosh, I feel like it can't get any worse, right? Hopefully the housing market will improve, and then yeah, stay tuned on what we end up doing and what kind of travels we have. So this is an interesting fun fact. It is September. We don't have any trips planned at all until February. So it's like October, November, December, January, February, 5 months from now. That's like unheard of. Like normally we have all kinds of trips planned, but we're actually super excited about it because fall is such a great time to be in Southwest Virginia. We're looking forward to going out and doing lots of hikes, lots of family time. We'll have the holidays coming up before you know it. We have tons of birthdays in October. Our baby was born in October, Jared, lots of family members. So yeah, we're excited to actually not be going anywhere for a couple of months. So
really excited. Yeah, 5 months is probably the longest we've gone without having any trip planned for as long as we've been together. So.
Yeah, and it's been what, a year and a half since we've traveled internationally.
Yeah.
Which we haven't done that since COVID or even maybe before that. So,
Before that,
um,
2017,
yeah,
I think.
I don't know that we'll do any international travel coming up. It's just not super fun, in my opinion, to travel with a baby. I mean, you'll find Instagram accounts to the contrary and YouTube accounts. Oh, you can travel with kids, but for us, it's just not that fun.
Maybe if we hadn't traveled a lot, we would feel more of an urge to do it. But yeah, I mean, we already had kind of gotten to the point where we didn't want to travel a whole lot internationally anymore. Like those trips get exhausting, the ones that we did at least. And so now adding a baby in and all the logistics with that and all the extra packing and luggage and stuff, it just does not sound fun right now.
Yeah. So I don't think we'll be taking any international trips anytime soon, but we'll see what's on the domestic front. We have been considering a cruise. We were looking at some Alaska cruises for next year. We really want to go back to Alaska. So we'll see. Maybe we'll go on a cruise next year. Maybe we'll go on some trips. But for right now, we're loving being at home. And yeah. So thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions about any of this, feel free to leave a comment or send us a message. And I hope you're all doing well. On the travel therapy front, since we are going to be home more over the next few months, we do hope to get some more content out there for you guys, some more educational stuff. We do still have our course available. We're going to be having a MedBridge sale coming up, or no, MedBridge giveaway coming up for PT month. Maybe some other stuff for PT month as well, some giveaways and things like that. So stay tuned on our social media channels for that.
We haven't talked about it, but I guess we're probably also going to do our year-end giveaway.
Right.
I don't think anybody, or maybe like 4 or 5 people have signed up for that, but giving away $1,200 or so at the end of the year in gift cards. So yeah, we'll talk more about that in coming months.
Yeah, if you guys have taken any travel therapy contracts with our recommended recruiters this year, make sure to fill out that giveaway entry form. I'll be posting it on social media, reminding you to get your entries in for that so that you can qualify to hopefully win the gift card giveaways. We give away, usually it's like 5 $200 gift cards or something like that, plus a couple extra for our course members and things like that at the end of the year. So stay tuned for that. I can't believe we're already talking about end of the year. It's like, wow, where did this year go?
Yep, went by fast.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in and hope you all have a great night and we'll talk to you soon.
Yep, take care, everyone.
Bye.